Personally, I found the elements and elemental reactions in Arknights Endfield, called arts and art reactions respectively in this game, and how they work a little bit confusing, so I thought making a video about these specifically is probably a good idea. A disclaimer or two ahead. First, this video is sponsored by Arknights Endfield, and it is not gonna explain the full combat system. It focuses solely on the elements and the arts and is aimed at beginners. Secondly, if you already know how the arts and reactions work, this video is not for you. Let's begin with the underlying basics. Arknights Endfield features 5 elements: physical, cryo, heat, electric, and nature. Technically, there is a 6th element called ether, but at least as of right now it is unused by playable characters, so we will ignore its existence for now. While cryo, heat, electric, and nature all work in a similar way, physical is different. The physical element does not directly interact with the other elements, and instead only interacts with itself through 4 different physical status effects: lift, knockdown, crush, and breach. When using a skill that applies either lift or knockdown, it will also inflict 1 stack of vulnerable, as well as applying a short crowd control effect upon the target's hit, either shortly suspending them in the air in the case of lift, or knocking them down in the case of, well, knockdown. Albeit, lift or knockdown are only applied if the enemy already has a stack of vulnerable. It should also be mentioned that elite and boss enemies have crowd control immunity, which means in this case only 1 stack of vulnerable is applied. Vulnerable can stack up to 4 times and does nothing. Vulnerable in itself does quite literally nothing. This is where the other 2 status effects, crush and breach, then come into play. If the enemy has no current stacks of vulnerable, inflicting either crush or breach will simply apply 1 stack of vulnerable, just similar to how lift and knockdown do. However, if the enemy does have at least 1 stack, they will not apply any stacks and instead consume all current ones, applying an effect with the strength and possibly duration depending on the amount of stacks consumed. Breach then deals a small amount of damage and increases the enemy's physical susceptibility with the amount and duration depending on the amount of stacks consumed. Crush, on the other hand, will deal a large amount of damage, but not apply any debuffs. Susceptibility is a separate modifier in the damage formula, and assuming the enemy has no susceptibility yet, it effectively means you will deal more damage equal to the amount of susceptibility added. As an example, if you were to deal 100 physical damage on a target with a 20% physical susceptibility, you will deal 120 damage instead, so 20% more damage. Because it is effectively multiplicative with all of your other stats, it is extremely potent and is hence also of utmost importance to have at least 1 source of breach in your physical teams. Unfortunately, Arknights is the literally only source of breach in the game as of right now. Which also means if you don't have the big Russian dude, you really just try to get 3 or even 4 stacks of vulnerable and then use crush. That being said, let's talk about the other elements. First, there are 2 types of, let's refer to them as interactions: art bursts and art reactions. At this point, we should also probably clarify something. Element refers to the 6 elements in the game: ether, which is currently unused, physical, heat, cryo, nature, and electric, whereas arts only refers to heat, cryo, nature, and electric. Art bursts happen when the same art is applied repeatedly on an enemy, and art reactions happen when a secondary art is applied upon a previously applied different art with a reaction then depending on the secondary art applied. Meaning the first art applied does not matter and the reaction triggered will fully and only depend on the secondary art. The current art reactions in the game are corrosion for nature, combustion for heat, electrification for, well, electric, and solidification for cryo. And technically shatter exists as well, but we will talk about this at the end. Applying nature infliction upon any other art will trigger then corrosion, which lasts for 15 seconds, deals some initial nature damage, and reduces the enemy's elemental resistance by 12 to 24%, depending on how many infliction stacks the enemy has had upon triggering corrosion. The resistance reduction will start off at a lower value and increases over time before capping out shortly before corrosion expires. Because corrosion reduces the elemental resistance and not just art resistance, this will also increase the physical damage dealt. Electrification is triggered upon applying an electric infliction upon any other art, deals some initial electric damage as well, and increases the art's damage taken for a certain amount of time, with both the duration and art's damage taken increase depending on the enemy infliction stacks before electrification was triggered. Because electrification increases only art's damage, physical damage is not affected by this, and Arknight is really sad about that. Applying heat upon an enemy possessing any other art's infliction will then trigger combustion, a simple dot that deals initial heat damage and then more heat damage over the duration of 10 seconds. As per usual, damage dealt will also scale with the initial amount of inflictions upon trigger. Lastly, we have solidification and shatter. Applying cryo upon any other art infliction will freeze the enemy, dealing some initial damage, with the duration depending on the amount of initial stacks. If a physical status is applied while an enemy is solidified, it will then trigger shatter, dealing a large amount of damage, which yet again depends on the initial amount of art infliction stacks when the solidification was triggered. As a special note, even though elites and bosses cannot be frozen, solidification can still be applied, but they will also still be able to move during it. Regardless of which art reaction is being triggered, upon doing so, all current art inflictions will also be consumed. That covers the art reactions, so let's also talk about art bursts, which occur when inflicting an art infliction upon an already present infliction of the same art. As an example, cryo burst occurs when applying cryo upon an enemy that is already affected by another cryo infliction. As opposed to art reactions, triggering an art burst does not remove previous inflictions. This effectively means you will trigger an art burst every time you apply a new stack upon the first. Art bursts have also a base damage multiplier based on the triggering character's level and is further increased for each stack already present. Effectively means if you care about the damage your art bursts do, you should level your characters. Having that said, let's summarize our main takeaways. Inflicting an art's burst does not consume any currently present stacks. Triggering an art's reaction, however, does consume all currently present stacks. Art's reactions become stronger depending on how many stacks of art inflictions have been present on the enemy upon trigger, whereas art bursts do not. They will always inflict the same amount of damage regardless of how many stacks the enemy has. Physical is an element and not an art. Because of that, electrification, which provides an art's damage increase, does not increase physical damage dealt. Corrosion, on the other hand, decreases all elemental resistances, means it also affects physical damage dealt. Physical operates primarily with each other, using the 4 physical statuses Lift, Knockdown, Break, and Crush, and can interact with solidification in the form of Shatter. And lastly, while Ether is technically an element, it is currently not usable by playable characters. And with that, we are at the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, leave a comment on your thoughts on the elements and how they work and whether or not you like it. And of course, join the Discord. A special thanks to my YouTube and Patreon members who make this content possible. If you wish to support me, you will find a link to my Patreon in the description, or simply click the join button right below this video. And as always, I appreciate all of you and wish you a great day. Peace!